Hi, I'm Isha Ali, and today we are back with another conversation. And today we are joined by Dr. Sobia here today, who has joined us all the way from University of Essex. She's from the Department of Sociology and Criminology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Sobia.
Thank you so much, Isha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we have so much to talk about with Dr. Sobia, and because while we were discussing what we need to, what we should go ahead with on our podcast, there were a lot of things that we found a common ground on, and few things that I think we should cover in today's podcast is, the DEI practices here in our institute, and how do you compare them, and what are the practices in UK, especially in your university, and also about the decoloniality of the curriculum in higher education. So let's start with DEI, since you're the DEI lead of your department as well. Do you think, let's get the basics right? Why do you think it's important to invest our resources and time and effort on DEI?
I think living in today's world, we live in such an increasingly aware environment. And we've come across so far over the decades in understanding the differences that inhibit excellence. And a lot of these differences inhibit excellence because of the way that structural issues stop people with exceptional talent from advancing up. And it might be because they might have very visible sort of differences. It might be around race, ethnicity. It might be around more invisible ones, maybe, for example, around hardships, mental health issues, anxieties. It might be about faith. It might be around gender. And all of these in the past have meant that people who are exceptionally talented are not able to really realize the talent that they hold. And that's to the detriment, not just, of course, to their personal selves, but also to the institutions that they serve and the societies in which they're embedded. So I'm incredibly pleased to sort of be alive today in this environment, in this world, where women are championed. In a country like the UK, where diversity of belief systems, of ethnicity, of race backgrounds, these are championed as well, and increasingly around differences in gender, differences in ability. All of these are very important for institutions to acknowledge and champion.
Yeah, very rightly said that now we are living in a time that at least these differences are recognized, and we're working to provide equitable opportunities. Greenwich University was one of the first universities that started this initiative with DEI in a higher education institute. But to be honest, our pre-colonial history, we might not have used the words DEI then, of course, but the culture itself was very pluralistic, and people were very, accepting of differences. People existed together for thousands of years. The land that we are right now on has the history of like 7,000 years, where different religions originated, and people have lived together for so many years, for thousands of years, and very peacefully. But things did change over the time. But coming back to how you explained the importance of DEI, one thing that we were discussing earlier as well, that when we talk about providing accessibility to students in educational institutes, the primary focus, which is very, very important, are the physical disabilities. But with this current generation, we see a surge in mental health issues as well. And when we talk about anxiety and depression, they do affect their ability to perform in a certain format. But are we equipped to handle those situations is an important point. I feel that we are still on the journey to be there. Where we are able to facilitate everyone. What has your experience been like dealing with students who are suffering from mental health issues specifically?
Yeah. So just to say something that in the UK, at least, there is an epidemic around anxiety and depression, especially amongst young people. Statistically, we know that it's about 20 to 30% of young people are feeling or experiencing these issues at the moment. And that's very important to us, because that means literally it's, one-fourth of our classroom, for example. And we don't want to be in an institution where we exclude that classroom from any of the access to any of our education, but also ability to perform in any of our examinations and assessments as well. And I'm very proud to say that at Essex, there's a whole system of support that exists to recognize that students with these difficulties might need adjustments. We have extenuating circumstances, that are recognized if students are able to report them at the time of examination or assessment submission. We also have more systemic evaluations that students can enroll and request at the point of enrolling into the university. So, for example, they might be able to better understand whether they have anxiety, how that anxiety manifests, how it sort of can be managed best, how it affects or impacts their studies. And each student who might get an assessment might get an outcome or a letter that's then passed on to departments, that's then passed on to course conveners, so that they can make appropriate adjustments within classrooms to include that kind of a student within the classroom environment. And that has been, one element. Another element is also the study support officer. So we've been one of the very few departments, even across universities in the UK, that has a dedicated study support officer who helps or assists all students, but especially students with disabilities in overcoming or understanding how to overcome any challenges for their assignments or within classrooms. At the same time, we also have a personal tutor system where students can come into their personal tutors, have a discussion with them, and these personal tutors can champion the student on behalf of themselves with other course conveners on different issues as well. And then we have exam boards that also pick up these systems, just to make sure that all systems are equitable to all students. The Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Lead sits in the exam boards to make sure that any passes or fails or any sort of differences in outcomes are not sort of based on or discriminatory in any kind of way. So there's a whole lot of systems that are there in support, recognizing that young people are living in a very difficult time at the moment, recognizing that there's a very uncertain future ahead, recognizing that the technologies that they're living with have impacted their lives in ways that is detrimental.
Okay, so you very nicely explained the measures that you've taken to make the environment in classrooms inclusive. If you talk about the curriculum itself, and how we were talking earlier, that for somebody coming from Global South, the curriculum generally wasn't as inclusive. It wasn't something that you could relate with, maybe. And generally, this post-colonial world that we are living in, the whole perception of education and intellect was very, very, specific, that only certain sort of people can be associated with intellect or understanding. How do you think that the decoloniality of curriculum can be done? Or if you have taken certain measures to do that, how are they?
So I'll confess, and this gives my age away, I'm a 90s kid. By the time I went for my higher education, for my master's and my PhD, it was the early 2000s. And then sort of around that time. And it was my first experience out of Pakistan, where, of course, Pakistan is the center of my world. That's how I formed my knowledge about, through my experiences interacting with not just local people, but also world politics. And when I went to study, this was in 2004 at the London School of Economics for my master's degree, I couldn't understand half the things they were talking about. They were talking about states as, formed through this system, the Westphalian state system. My understanding of state formation was decolonization in 1947, the partition of India. They were talking about the state as one entity. I was thinking, but what about the hybrid state? What about the army, the bureaucracy, all these other elements? They were talking about
government system that we have running.
System.
Yes.
They were talking about government as a formal institute, like formally institutionalized system. I was thinking, what about the governance that happens every day in people's lives through informal structures, which is more functional in the Pakistani case? So I'm very pleased to say that over the last 15 years, there have been active pushbacks by people who were new at that time, like myself, who were starting their PhD around 2005, 2010, 2015, who were really challenging, our instructors in the classroom, our colleagues in the classroom, that we need to expand where knowledge is coming from. And that did happen eventually. People like myself ended up in the academy. We're making change every day. We're changing our course materials. We're including scholars from the South as the key reader, for key readings, subscribing their books for students to read and learn. So I'm very proud to say that decolonization is very much underway.
So thank you so much, Dr. Sobia, for joining us today. And we briefly just touched on these very important topics. And I'm looking forward to have another conversation with you where we can discuss these topics in detail. So today we very briefly talked about why DEI is important. These initiatives are important and how important it is to make the classrooms inclusive, come up with alternate measures to provide equitable opportunities to everyone if we want to tap the full potential of our society, and also how curriculum has to change and evolve in this post-colonial world. Thank you so much for watching us today.